11:51.
I have been many years training in the way of strategy. The character for way is read Nichi in Japanese, or Do in Chinese-based reading. It is equivalent to the Chinese Dao, and means the whole of life of the warrior, his devotion to the sword, and his place in the system. The divine footprints of God pointing the way. Strategy, or heiho, is a word of Chinese derivation meaning military strategy. He means soldier, and ho means method or form. It is now during the first 10 days of the 10th month, 1645, and I have climbed the mountain Iwato of Higo to pay homage to heaven and kneel before Buddha. I am a warrior of Harima Province, Shinmen Oshashi no Kami Fujiwara no Genshin, age 60 years. From youth, my heart has been inclined toward the way of strategy, or the sword. My first duel when I was 13, I struck down a strategist or swordsman of the Shinto school, one Aimaki. When I was 16, I struck down an able strategist, Tadashima Akiyama. When I was 21, I went up to the capital and met all manner of strategists, never once failing to win in many contests. After that, I went from province to province, dueling with strategists of various schools, and not once failed to win, even though I had as many as 16 encounters. This was between the ages of 13 and 28 or 29. When I reached 30, I looked back on my past. The previous victories were not due to my having mastered strategy. Perhaps it was natural ability, or the order of heaven, or that other school strategies were inferior. After that, I studied morning and evening, searching for the principle, and came to realize the way of strategy when I was 50. Since then, I've lived without following any particular way. Thus, the virtue of strategy, I practice many arts and abilities, all things with no teacher. To write this book, I did not use the law of Buddha, or the teachings of Confucius, neither old war chronicles, nor books on martial tactics. I take up my brush to explain the true spirit of this Ichi school, as it is mirrored in the way of heaven and Kwanan, Buddhism's goddess of mercy. The time is the night of the 10th day of the 10th month, and the hour of the tiger, 3 to 5 a.m. The Ground Book. Strategy is the craft of the warrior. Commanders must enact the craft, and troopers should know this way. There is no warrior in the world today who really understands the way of strategy. There are various ways. There is the way of salvation by the law of Buddha, the way of Confucius, governing the way of learning, the way of healing as a doctor, as a poet, teaching the way of waka, tea, archery, and many other arts and skills. Each man practices as he feels inclined. It is said the warrior's is the twofold way of pen and sword, and he should have a taste for both ways. Even if a man has no natural ability, he can be a warrior by sticking assiduously to both divisions of the way. Generally speaking, the way of the warrior is resolute acceptance of death. This idea can be summed up as the philosophy expounded in Hagakure, or Hidden Leaves, a book written in the 17th century by Yamamoto Tsunenori and a few other samurai of the province Nabeshima-han, present-day Saga. Although not only warriors, but priests, women, peasants, and lowlier folk have been known to die readily in the cause of duty or out of shame. This is a different thing. The warrior is different in that studying the way of strategy is based on overcoming men. By victory gained in crossing swords with individuals or in joining battle with large numbers, we can attain power and fame for ourselves or our Lord. This is the virtue of strategy. Even an unadaptable man who is completely useless is a most trusted retainer if he does nothing more than think earnestly of his lord's welfare. To think only of the practical benefit of wisdom and technology is vulgar. So when you embark upon something, before you start, fix your intention on the 4 oaths and put selfishness behind you. Then you cannot fail. The 4 oaths: never be late with respect to the way of the warrior. Be useful to the Lord. Be respectful to your parents. Get beyond love and grief. Exist for the good of man. The way of strategy. In China and Japan, practitioners of the way have been known as masters of strategy. Warriors must learn this way. Recently, there have been people getting on in the world as strategists, but they are usually just sword fencers. The attendants of the Kashima Kantoril's shrine of the province Hitachi received instruction from the gods, and made schools based on this teaching, traveling from country to country instructing men. This is the most recent meaning of strategy. In olden times, strategy was listed among the 10 abilities and 7 arts as a beneficial practice. It was certainly an art, but as a beneficial practice, it was not limited to sword fencing. The true value of sword fencing cannot be seen within the confines of sword fencing technique. If we look at the world, we see arts for sale. Men use equipment to sell their own selves. As if with the nut and the flower, the nut has become less than the flower. In this kind of way of strategy, both those teaching and those learning the way are concerned with coloring and showing off the technique.
So the art, is the earth flat or curved?
Trying to hasten the bloom of the flower, they speak of this dojo and that dojo. They are looking for profit.
So I'm only 3 kilometers in. It took like 30 minutes for 4 kilometers. Really slow.
Someone once said, immature strategy is the cause of grief. That was a true saying. There are 4 ways in which men pass through life: as gentlemen, farmers, artisans, and merchants. The way of the farmer. Using agricultural instruments, he sees springs through to autumns with an eye on the changes of season. Second is the way of the merchant. The winemaker obtains his ingredients and puts them to use to make his living. The way of the merchant is always to live by taking profit. This is the way of the merchant. Thirdly, the gentleman warrior, carrying the weaponry of his way. The way of the warrior is to master the virtue of his weapons. If a gentleman dislikes strategy, he will not appreciate the benefit of weaponry, so must he not have a little taste for this? Fourthly, the way of the artisan. The way of the carpenter is to become proficient in the use of his tools, first to lay his plans with a true measure, and then perform his work according to plan. Thus he passes through life. These are the 4 ways of the gentleman, the farmer, the artisan, and the merchant.
So I have 3 animals in my way. Cows.
Comparing the way of the carpenter to strategy. Here, carpenter means both architect and builder, as well as carpenter. The comparison with carpentry is through the connection with houses. houses of the nobility, houses of warriors, the four houses, ruin of houses, thriving of houses, the style of the house, the tradition of the house, and the name of the house. The carpenter uses a master plan of the building, and the way of strategy is similar in that there is a plan of campaign. If you want to learn the craft of war, ponder over this book. The teacher is as a needle. The disciple is as thread. You must practice constantly. Like the foreman carpenter, the commander must know natural rules and the rules of the country and the rules of houses. This is the way of the foreman. The foreman carpenter must know the architectural theory of towers and temples and the plans of palaces, and must employ men to raise up houses. The way of the foreman carpenter is the same as the way of the commander of a warrior house. In the construction of houses, choice of woods is made. Straight, unknotted timber of good appearance is used for the revealed pillars. Straight timber with small defects is used for the inner pillars. Timber of the finest appearance, even if a little weak, is used for thresholds, lintels, doors, and sliding doors, and so on. Good, strong timber, though it be gnarled and knotted, can always be used discreetly in construction. Timber which is weak or knotted throughout should be used as scaffolding and later for firewood. The foreman carpenter allots his men work according to their ability. Floor layers, makers of sliding doors, thresholds and lintels, ceilings, and so on. Those of poor ability lay the floor joists, and those of lesser ability carve wedges and do such miscellaneous work. If the foreman knows and deploys his men well, the finished work will be good. The foreman should take into account the abilities and limitations of his men, circulating among them and asking nothing unreasonable. He should know their morale and spirit and encourage them when necessary. This is the same as the principle of strategy. The way of strategy. Like a trooper, the carpenter sharpens his own tools. He carries his equipment in his toolbox and works under the direction of his foreman.
Oh shit!
He makes columns and girders with an axe, shapes floorboards and shelves with a plane, cuts fine openwork and carvings accurately, giving as excellent a finish as his skill will allow. This is the craft of the carpenters. When the carpenter becomes skilled and understands measures, he can become a foreman. The carpenter's attainment is having tools which will cut well to make small shrines, writing shelves, tables, paper lanterns, chopping boards, and pot lids. These are the specialties of the carpenter. Things are similar for the trooper. You want to think deeply about this. The attainment of the carpenter is that his work is not warped, that the joints are not misaligned, and that the work is truly planed so that it meets well and is not merely finished in sections. This is essential. If you want to learn this way, deeply consider the things written in this book one at a time. You must do sufficient research.
downhill. I'm going down.
Outline of the 5 books of this book of strategy. 5 books, or Go Ring no Sho, means a book of 5 rings. The Godai, the 5 greats of Buddhism, are the 5 elements which make up the cosmos: ground, water, fire, wind, and void. The Gorin, the 5 rings of Buddhism, are the 5 parts of the human body: head, left and right elbows, and left and right knees. The way is shown as 5 books concerning different aspects. These are ground, water, fire, wind or tradition, and void. The body of the way of strategy from the viewpoint of my Ichi school is explained in the ground book. It is difficult to realize the true way just through sword fencing. Know the smallest things and the biggest things, the shallowest things and the deepest things, as if it were a straight road mapped out on the ground. The first book is called the ground book. Second is the water book. With water as the basis, the spirit becomes like water. Water adopts the shape of its recipient. It is sometimes a trickle and sometimes a wild sea.
एंजॉय कौन कर रहा है? हम तो पैदल आ रहा है इस्लामाबाद से, है ना? अभी मरी तक जा रहा है। मरी जाएगा।
Water has a clear blue color. By the clarity, things of Ichi school are shown in this book. If you master the principles of sword fencing, when you freely beat one man, you beat any man in the world. The spirit of defeating a man is the same for 10 million men. The strategist makes small things into big things, like building a great Buddha from a 1-foot model.
It looks like it's a struggle, but I'm having the best time. This is why we do it. You have no idea how much fun I'm having.
I cannot write in detail how this is done. The principle of strategy is having one thing to know 10,000 things. Things of Ichi school are written in this, the water book. Third is the fire book. This book is about fighting. The spirit of fire is fierce, whether the fire be small or big, and so it is with battles. The way of battles is the same for man-to-man fights, and for 10,000 aside battles. You must appreciate that spirit can become big or small. What is big is easy to perceive. What is small is difficult to perceive. In short, it is difficult for large numbers of men to change position so their movements can be easily predicted. An individual can easily change his mind, so his movements are difficult to predict. You must appreciate this. The essence of this book is that you must train day and night in order to make quick decisions. In strategy, it is necessary to treat training as a part of normal life, with your spirit unchanging. Thus, combat in battle is described in the Fire Book. Fourthly, the Wind Book. This book is not concerned with my Ichi school, but with other schools of strategy. By wind, I mean old traditions, present-day traditions, and family traditions of strategy. Thus, I clearly explain the strategies of the world. This is tradition. It is difficult to know yourself if you do not know others. To all ways, there are contrasts. If you study a way daily, and your spirit diverges, you may think you are obeying a good way, but objectively, it is not the true way. If you are following the true way and diverge a little, this will later become a large divergence. You must realize this. Other strategies have come to be thought of as mere sword fencing, and it is not unreasonable that this should be so. The benefit of my strategy, although it includes sword fencing, lies in a separate principle. I have explained what is commonly meant by strategy in other schools in the Tradition or Wind Book. Fifthly, the Book of the Void. By void, I mean that which has no beginning and no end. Attaining this principle means not attaining the principle. The way of strategy is the way of nature. When you appreciate the power of nature, knowing the rhythm of any situation, you will be able to hit the enemy naturally and strike naturally. All this is the way of the void. I intend to show you how to follow the true way, according to nature, in the Book of the Void. The Name Ichi Ryo Nito. One school, two swords. Warriors, both commanders and troopers, carried two swords at their belt. In olden times, these were called the long sword and the sword. Nowadays they are known as the sword and the companion sword. Let it suffice to say that in our land, whatever the reason, a warrior carries two swords at his belt. It is the way of the warrior. Nito Ichi Ryu shows the advantage of using both swords. Students of the Ichi school way of strategy should train from the start with the sword and long sword in either hand. Note that the samurai wore two swords thrust through the belt with the cutting edges upward on the left side. The shorter or companion sword was carried at all times, and the longer sword worn only out of doors. From time to time, there were rules governing the style and length of swords.
And I talked to the local people and they say I'm not going to make it because the rain is coming. Me to return back to Peace or Harbor. So let's see.